In an age where people feel the need to debate amps versus modelers and modelers versus amps, it's really quite silly, especially in a recording context, because I think the two work really well together. In fact, a good modeler like the FM9 makes the recording workflow of a tube amp that much better, and I think a tube amp gives a modeler a higher purpose, and that's with reamping, and that's what I'm talking about today. Hey there, I'm Dan, the self-proclaimed Lonely Rocker. Thank you so much for joining me today. So I'm really excited to be making this video. I've been wanting to make it for a while, but reamping is probably the #1 reason, or the thing that really convinced me to finally get into pro-level modelers, because a device like the Fractal FM9, on top of being an amazing amp modeler in its own right, full of effects and things like that, there's a lot of signal routing capability, and I can bring tube amps into the signal chains of the FM9 for reamping purposes. Now, I felt there was a bit of a gap out there in terms of videos covering this, because all the reamping videos that I saw related to reamping amp models inside the FM9 or the Axe-FX III and things like that. So hopefully I'll fill a little gap here. I'm going to show you my workflow on how I bring my tube amps into the signal chain and reamping with actual amplifiers. Now, I want to mention this is not a sponsored video, but the guys at Fractal did see my last video, which was about my first 60 days with my first Fractal product, and they sent over this lovely t-shirt, so I'm now officially a Fractal fanboy, but thanks to the guys at Fractal for sending that over. Anyways, let's get into reamping. Absolutely love those tones. That's the Schecter C1 SLS Elite with the Fishman Fluence Moderns running into the Engel Powerball 2. That's high gain channel 3, ultimately through the FM9. I'll get into the specifics in a second. But what's important to note with this setup is that I'm recording my amps direct. So they're running through a load box and then eventually make their way into the FM9. So really I get the benefit of both worlds. You know, using a modeler, obviously you can record anytime, day or night, and not piss off other people in your house. I can do that with real amplifiers because I take a line level ultimately from the amplifier through the load box into the FM9, so I can work at comfortable volumes. As I do here is I monitor it through my studio monitors, the same place I'm listening to my mix. So when I'm setting up my tones, I'm hearing exactly what I'm going to be recording. So it's a real benefit, the ultimate best of both worlds. All right, so let me take you through the hardware setup so you can see what's required to accomplish something like this, and then we'll get into the routing. For this setup, the Fractal FM9 is my main audio interface. I'm on a Mac Studio, and most of the connections are USB-C compatible Thunderbolt 4. The FM9 has a USB 2.0 Type-B connection, so I'm using a USB-C adapter and running about 6 feet directly into my computer in my machine room on the other side of that wall. This has been working without issues. The XLR outputs from output 1 connect to my studio monitors. This gives me zero latency direct monitoring when recording. My guitar is plugged into the instrument input 1. Using a Fractal Humbuster cable, I connect the TRS end of the cable to output 3 on the FM9, and the blue end TS connection goes into the input on my amplifier. The speaker output of the amp connects to the input of my SUR reactive load box, and then I use an XLR to TRS cable connecting from the balance out on the load box to input 3 on the FM9, which is also balanced. I find using the Humbuster cable and balance connections really helps to reduce any unwanted noise from the amplifier, but you can run unbalanced connections, but you may find you have a little more noise. Experiment to see what works best in your setup. And lastly, set the output connected to your amp all the way up. That is unity gain. In this case, that is output 3. All right, now that the hardware is configured, we need to create a preset to set up our signal routing and our signal chain. Now, I like to use the desktop application. I just find that easier, but of course you can do that right on the device itself. But let's take a look at this preset to see how it works. Here's the basic setup to route your amp into the Fractal. Input 1 connects to output 3, which is connected to the input of my amp. Output 3 connects to input 3, which is the signal coming back into the Fractal from my load box. And then this all connects to output 1, which sends the signal out to my speakers, and USB 1.2 for recording in my DAW. This is the loop that inserts our amp into the signal chain. Think of these two blocks as the equivalent of an amp block, and then you can build your preferred signal chain with effects before and after the amp. I set up my preset with 2 rows so I have room for more blocks, but this is the same loop as in the previous example. Blocks I insert into the top row are in front of the amp, so I'll place drives, boosts, wahs, and things like that. And blocks assigned to the second row are after the amp. This is where I place my cab block, as well as things like delays and reverbs. If you want to play your guitar through this preset, click Setup, and then Audio, and make sure Input 1 is set to Analog. I'll revisit the setting when we are ready to reamp. By the way, if you think you'd benefit from additional visual aids, I've actually created a PDF file, and I'll make the preset that I've created in this video available on my Patreon. That's linked down below. That supports my endeavors here on YouTube, and I appreciate all the help. If you're getting all the information you need directly from this video, perhaps you'd consider clicking the like button. It goes a long way to telling YouTube that you're enjoying this video, and I really appreciate that. Now that we have our preset configured, we need to jump into the DAW to finish the signal routing. Now, I'm using Logic Pro, so my apologies to those of you not on Logic, but these are just basic inputs and outputs, so you just need to find whatever the equivalent settings are in your particular DAW. All we need to do at this stage is to create 2 tracks. For the first track, I create a stereo track and set the input to 1 and 2. This will receive the finished stereo preset coming out of the Fractal. If your DAW handles stereo tracks differently, make sure you are receiving tracks 1 and 2. In essence, this will be our scratch track that we will replace later when reamping. Then I create a second mono track and assign it to input 5. This will receive the DI signal from the guitar. If you're using a different device, go into the setup of your edit software and click on the audio tab and look along the bottom. This setting here will tell you where the DI is and set your DAW accordingly. One other quick setting is to make sure your project is set to record in 48K, as the Fractal only supports this resolution. At this point, you can call up the reamping preset we created earlier if you want to record your amp live. Or if you'd rather lay down a Fractal amp model as the guide track instead, you can do that too. That's usually what I do. As long as you record the DI track at the same time, you'll be able to send it back through your tube amp later. Make sure both tracks are armed and record as you normally do. All right, now that we have our guitar part recorded, we want to reamp it. So in essence, we want to send it out from our DAW. It's going to come through the FM9. We're going to loop it through the amplifier and then back in through that preset that we created. And then we're going to re-record that onto another track. To prepare for reamping, we need to go back into Setup. In the Audio tab, we need to change Input 1 to Digital. Back in our DAW, we can mute the guide track we recorded. The mono DI track is what we will feed back into our amp. The USB in and out channels are the same as you use when recording the DI. So when reamping with the FM9, you need to set the output of this DI track to mono output 5. This is the same on the Axe-FX III, and I believe is channel 3 on the FM3. Check at the bottom of the Audio tab to confirm what the digital input source is. And don't forget to set the dial of your output channel all the way to the right for unity gain. Create a new track to record onto. This can be stereo or mono, depending on what you're trying to achieve. Set the input channel to 1 and 2 if you're working in stereo, or either 1 or 2 depending on what you need. This needs to match the output setting in your reamping preset. And speaking of that preset, now is when the fun starts. You can loop a section in your project through this preset and adjust your amp and effects in real time. Add blocks to your signal chain and tweak until it sounds right. With both your hands free, you can try so many things until it's perfect. When your tone is ready, hit record and lay it in. Depending on your setup, you may experience some latency when recording your reamped track. So before you move on, just make sure the recorded track is in sync with the original DI track, and you should be good to go. I can't stress enough how much this has really elevated the game here in my studio. I mean, advanced signal routing, the ability to process the guitar on the way in. And ultimately for me, this whole idea of being in the preset generation is so easy just to call up a preset, stack multiple amps in here. I'm still shaping my own sounds through my own amplifiers. I'm multi-tracking and layering in my projects, and I'm just getting great guitar sounds, and I'm really, really happy because I think my guitars are sounding better than they ever have. Anyways, I just wanted to demonstrate this for you. I hope you get some ideas from this. Obviously, you need a little extra gear to make this happen, but if you're on the fence, maybe you're an old amp guy like me and you're wondering if modeling is for you, this is something that I wanted to share with you because now that I've gone this route, I don't know if I can go back. So anyways, just some ideas there. Always happy to hear your thoughts on that. That's what the comment section is for. Well, there you have my Fractal FM9 reamping setup. I hope that helped you out. Like I said, if you're on an FM3 or an Axe-FX3, the process is the same thing. If you want those detailed PDFs, the link to my Patreon is down below. Plus, I'm a little more accessible over there for more detailed conversations, so perhaps you'll check me out on Patreon. Now, I did a whole video about my experience of using my first Fractal product for 60 days. Well, I'm gonna put that over here, so make sure you check that out. But if you did enjoy this video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. And remember, you don't need a band to rock and roll, and I'll catch you in the next one.